They always said corn grows faster if you talk to it. I never believed that, not really, but Dad did. He believed a lot of strange things, that you shouldn't whistle at night, that birds who don't fly away when you clap have already sized you up, that the scarecrow in our south field didn't just keep the crows away, it kept other things out too. He never explained what other things meant. He'd just spit on the dirt, tip his hat toward the horizon, and mutter something about respecting boundaries. We lived in a stretch of Kansas so flat it looked like God had smoothed it out with the palm of his hand. Our farmhouse sat right in the middle of nowhere, swallowed on all sides by fields that whispered when the wind passed through. The only thing taller than the corn was the old wooden scarecrow in the south field looming, stiff and still. Or at least, it used to be. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I thought I was just tired. I'd been up since before dawn, helping Dad rotate the irrigation lines. By sunset, I was walking the edge of the south field, checking for coyotes, when I glanced up and realized the scarecrow wasn't facing the road anymore. He was turned a little, not a lot, just a few degrees to the left, like he'd gotten bored and wanted to watch something else. His arms were still outstretched, tied to the crossbar, his burlap face stitched into that same stitched smile, but the twist in his posture was subtle and unmistakable. I didn't say anything. Not that night. Maybe the wind had turned him. Maybe Dad had adjusted him and forgot to mention it. I went back inside, ate my dinner, and tried to forget the feeling of being watched as I crossed the dirt yard. The next morning, he'd moved again, and this time he was definitely closer. Before we jump back in, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. Another story, another secret, and maybe a whisper you weren't meant to hear. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was just the wind, that I was imagining things, that maybe I hadn't remembered where the scarecrow stood in the first place. But when I stepped outside at sunrise, coffee in hand, the truth was standing right in front of me, about 10 feet closer than yesterday. The scarecrow had moved. He still stood in the row where we'd planted barley last year, his arms drooping now like the crossbeam had sagged, his head tilted just enough to notice. And he was facing the house directly, not a little turned like before, staring, watching. I walked out to him with slow, measured steps, heart thudding with each crunch of dirt under my boots. I looked for signs, animal tracks, broken ties, footprints, but the ground was undisturbed. The ropes on his arms were still knotted tight to the beam, no drag marks, no signs of tampering. The scarecrow shouldn't have been able to move, but it had. I checked the post, it was buried deep solid. The whole structure creaked slightly as I touched it, like it had been weathered loose, but it wasn't going anywhere on its own. I circled it, my breath frosting in the cold morning air. That's when I noticed something else. The crows weren't out today. Our farm always had crows. They were annoying, loud, and fearless, but this morning, nothing, just silence. No wind, no birds, no buzzing insects, just static. Not in the air exactly, but in my head, like the feeling you get when a TV is on in another room. A faint buzz behind my ears, like something was watching me through a screen I couldn't see. When I told my dad what I'd seen, he didn't flinch. He just took a long drag from his cigarette, stared out the window toward the south field, and muttered, "It's early this year." I blinked. "What's early?" He didn't answer me right away. Just opened the drawer, pulled out the old coil of barbed wire, and handed it to me. "Wrap his legs, nail the post. Use the railroad spikes." "Dad, what?" "If he moves again, we leave." By noon, I'd wrapped the scarecrow's legs with 2 layers of rusted barbed wire. My gloves tore in 3 places, and I still managed to nick my forearm on one of the spikes. Blood dotted the straw at his feet like tiny red seeds. The barbed wire dug into the burlap fabric around his legs, tangling with the stuffing beneath. I made sure of it. I didn't stop until he looked ridiculous, strung up like a prisoner about to be executed. Then I went one step further. I found the biggest railroad spikes. Dad kept in the shed leftovers from some forgotten project and drove them into the base of the wooden post with his old sledgehammer. The ground trembled slightly with each slam. I was sweating, pissed off, and unnerved in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't believe in haunted scarecrows, but I also didn't believe in corn that listened when you talked to it, or birds that judged your soul. Yet somehow here, I was shackling a pile of straw like it had murdered someone in its sleep. When I finished, I took 3 steps back and looked him in the face. His head was crooked, leaning a little to the left. The stitched mouth had frayed over the years, one thread dangling like a loose smile. His eyes, 2 shiny black buttons, seemed deeper today, like they were catching lighter than they should have in the overcast sky. I whispered, "Move again, and I'll burn you." And that was when I heard it. Just a whisper, almost nothing like static under breath. Not a voice, not even a word. Just the softest crackling hiss that buzzed in my ear as I turned away. That night I didn't sleep in my room. I pulled the old cot into the hallway just outside Dad's door, like I used to when I was a kid afraid of thunderstorms. I told myself it was because the draft in my room was cold, that the windows whistled too much, that I just wanted to be closer to the kitchen. But the truth was, I didn't want to see the scarecrow from my bedroom window. I woke up at 3:13, heart pounding, and I swear, I heard the front steps creak. I held my breath, straining to hear through the dark. The house was old, full of natural creaks and sighs, but this sound was different, measured, like weight shifting on wood. Like footsteps, one at a time, 13 slow creaks. I counted. And then silence. I stayed frozen on the cot, blankets pulled halfway up my chest, ears wide open. The hallway was still. My dad's door was closed. The floorboards didn't groan again, and the air felt heavy, as if the entire house was holding its breath with me. After what felt like a full hour, I finally rose, quiet, barefoot, careful. I crept to the window at the front of the house and pulled the curtain back an inch. Just enough to see the porch. Nothing. The yard looked the same. Gravel, dirt, corn, stalks rustling lightly in the wind. Then my eyes drifted to the field. The scarecrow wasn't there. My stomach flipped. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Maybe the dark was playing tricks on me. Maybe the moonlight was catching the wrong angle. But I knew where he was supposed to be. I'd driven those spikes into the dirt myself. Now, only an empty post stood there, still wrapped in barbed wire. Torn burlap strands fluttered around the wood like dead leaves. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. I checked every door in the house twice. The locks were in place. No windows broken. No muddy footprints on the floor. But the house felt wrong. Like something had stepped in that didn't belong. At sunrise, Dad came downstairs. I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a baseball bat across my lap and cold coffee in my hand. He didn't ask questions, just looked at me, then out the window, and sighed like he'd been dreading this moment for years. "He's not gone," he said. "He's just hiding." I stared at him. "You're saying it like this has happened before." Dad didn't answer. He walked to the back door, opened it, and scanned the field. Then, in a voice low and steady, he said, "We've got 3 days." "What do you mean, we've got 3 days?" I asked. Dad didn't turn around. He just stared out across the cornfield, squinting like he was trying to spot something only he could see. The sky was cloudless, pale and empty, but his shoulders were tense. He looked older than he did yesterday, older than ever, like the years were catching up all at once. "It starts slow," he said. "Always does. A turn of the head, a shift of the wind. The animals go quiet, then the static, then the steps." I swallowed hard. "You've seen this before." He finally looked at me. "Not since I was your age. We were living on my grandfather's land, just outside Topeka. He had a scarecrow too, same kind of post, same kind of burlap. I thought it was just a dumb decoration until it moved. Same way yours did. Little at first, then closer. Then, he stopped, jaw tightening. 3 days later, my brother vanished, and the scarecrow was back on its post, like nothing ever happened. I sat down slowly, the words hitting me like a cold wind. Why didn't you ever tell me? He looked away. Because we moved. We left the land. I thought we left it behind. But we didn't. No, he said. It followed the bloodline. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell him how insane that sounded. But part of me already knew he was right. I could feel. In the static that buzzed in the corners of my mind. In the way the air thickened after sunset. In the heavy silence around the field. Why 3 days? I asked. He stared into the corn like it might answer. I don't know. Maybe that's how long it takes to root itself in a place. Or maybe it's just playing with us. That night, we locked every door and left the lights on. We didn't talk. We just listened. Around 2:30 a.m., the TV in the living room turned on by itself, just snow and static. Volume rising slowly until the walls seemed to vibrate. We unplugged it. It kept going. And that's when I noticed something outside the window. Not a shape, not a figure, just a shadow, tall, still, facing the house, wearing a hat made of stitched burlap and straw. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette, tall and crooked, standing just beyond the porch light, like it was waiting for something, or someone. The static had stopped after we yanked the TV cord out of the wall, but the silence that followed was worse. It was too clean, too hollow, like the house had gone deaf. Dad sat in the living room, shotgun across his lap, eyes fixed on the front door. I asked if he thought it would help. He didn't answer. Just said, "It wants to be let in." In the morning, we checked the yard. There were no footprints, no damage, nothing but the loose burlap hat lying neatly on the porch steps. I picked it up with the edge of a rake, trying not to touch it. It smelled like rain and old dirt, but also something else. Something faintly burnt. I burned it behind the barn. Dad didn't stop me. That day, I kept glancing toward the field, half expecting to see the scarecrow back on his post like it had all been a dream. But the post remained empty, the barbed wire still twisted in place, fluttering slightly in the wind. By noon, something else changed. Our dog, Harley, started barking at the hallway mirror. Not growling, just barking, loud and sharp, tail stiff, eyes fixed. When I picked him up to calm him down, he whimpered and clawed at my chest like he wanted to get away from his own reflection. When I looked into the mirror, I saw only myself. But something about the way I moved, just a fraction too slow, made my stomach turn. That night, I tried sleeping again. I left the door cracked, lights on, baseball bat under the bed. At 3:33 a.m., I woke up to the softest knock on my window, not a tap. A knock, 3 slow thuds. I froze, breath caught in my chest. I didn't look. I couldn't. But then I heard it, my dad's voice, whispering from the other side of the glass. "It's just me, kid, let me in." Except I knew something was wrong. My dad was asleep on the couch downstairs, and I could hear him snoring. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stared at the ceiling until the sky outside turned gray, and the birds started chirping again. The next morning, the scarecrow was back on its post. But this time, its head was tilted toward my bedroom window, and its mouth, stitched just days ago, was open. The open mouth wasn't wide, just enough to see that the stitches had snapped in the middle. Not torn, but unraveled, carefully, like someone had picked them loose with a knife. When I pointed it out to Dad, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the field with the look of someone listening for thunder they already know is coming. Then he muttered, "It started mimicking He pulled out an old shoebox from the hall closet that I'd never seen before. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle as onion skin, faded photos of barns, grainy black and white shots of cornfields with shadows standing where they shouldn't be. One article had a headline that stopped me cold. Local boy found in field with mouth sewn shut, no suspects, no footprints. Dad didn't explain. He just handed me the box and said, "Everything I know about it is in there." I didn't want to read. I didn't want to know. But by now I understood. Not knowing wouldn't save me. I stayed inside all day, windows locked, curtains drawn. But even then, I could feel it watching. There's something unnatural about that feeling. Like the stare doesn't just come from outside, but from behind your thoughts. Like it knows the parts of you you've never said aloud. At one point, I tried turning on the radio to drown it out. Static, every station. Even the cassette player buzzed when I tried to play Dad's old tapes. I pressed stop, and for a split second, just before the sound cut out completely, I heard something underneath. My voice, whispering. 3 words repeated again and again, "Let me in." That night, the knocking came back. This time from the back door, then the side door, then the attic. It was playing with us. I walked into the kitchen, barefoot and shaking, just as Dad stood from the couch. He didn't say a word, just nodded. Toward the stairs. "The attic?" I whispered. He nodded again. "We never opened it, not since we moved in." I stared up at the ceiling. The attic door was a square of old wood, dust-lined and silent. Then, as we stood there watching, it opened, slowly, deliberately, with a soft creak that sounded far too much like a grin. The attic door gaped open like a mouth in the ceiling, yawning into blackness. Waiting, neither of us moved, not for a long time. Just stood there bathed in the pale kitchen light, staring up like a prayer might fall out. I finally whispered, "Do we go up?" Dad shook his head. "No, we wait." But we didn't have to wait long. From the attic came the sound of footsteps, soft, slow, impossibly light. Not shuffling like an animal, not heavy like a man. Just the steady tap, tap. Tap of something that shouldn't be able to walk at all. And then it stopped, directly. Above us, the ceiling creaked once. Then again. Then silence. Dad raised his shotgun and backed slowly into the living room, his eyes locked on the square hole above the hallway. I followed, every nerve in my body drawn tight, like the air itself might shatter. We didn't sleep. We barely moved. Just sat there with the lights on, waiting for another sound. But it never came, not from the attic. Instead, just before dawn, we heard the wind shift outside, and the front door unlocked itself. I jumped up, heart slamming in my chest. The deadbolt clicked on its own. The knob turned slightly, stopped, then turned the other way, like fingers were testing it, like it was trying to learn the mechanics of coming inside. I ran to the door and braced my shoulder against it, locking it again, flipping the latch twice, then dragging the old coat rack in front of it. I turned back to Dad. He was staring out the window. "It's not in the attic anymore," he said. I followed his gaze. Out in the field, just barely visible through the morning fog, was the Scarecrow, back on its post, arms out, head forward. But now it had a second head. One made of bone, human, skewered on the opposite end of the crossbar like a warning. Dad turned away and muttered, "It's marked you." For most of my life, I believed daylight was safe. That darkness was where the monsters lived, in the corners of your room, under the bed, behind the closet door. But the Scarecrow stood in the field at noon, clear as day, and it was worse than any nightmare I'd ever had. It wasn't just back on the post. It was active. Its arms weren't hanging limp anymore. They were stretched straight out, like wings. The second head still hung from the crossbeam, sun-bleached and grinning, with empty sockets facing the house. I stared at it from the porch, unable to move, while Dad poured gasoline into an old rusted can. "We burn it tonight," he said flatly. "Sunset, before the third night, before it takes root." "Takes root?" I asked, but I already knew what he meant. The house had changed. The walls felt thinner. Mirrors showed things they shouldn't. The phone rang last night, and when I picked up, I heard my own voice screaming on the other end. Not saying anything, just screaming, like it was stuck somewhere I couldn't see. All day, the Scarecrow stayed in place, but something about it vibrated, like it was flickering between worlds. Birds wouldn't fly over the field anymore. Even the wind refused to pass through that patch of corn. Everything in nature seemed to know the field was no longer natural. That evening, Dad packed the truck with the can of gasoline, rope, a shovel, and a lighter. He told me not to speak once we crossed into the field. "It listens," he said. "And once it hears your voice, it can wear it." I followed him down the dirt path toward the post, heartbeat drumming like war inside my ears. The closer we got, the more wrong everything felt. The corn was silent, unmoving. The air grew heavier, like breathing through water. The Scarecrow didn't shift, didn't twitch, but its presence pressed down on us like a second sky. We stood at the base of the post. Dad knelt and began dousing the straw feet with gasoline. I kept watch, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the stitched face. Its mouth was closed again, no thread this time, just folded tight like it was holding something back. Then I saw it. The button eyes moved, not a blink, not a twitch, but they focused like tiny glass pupils adjusting, locking onto me, as if it had just realized who I was. I took a step back, but Dad was already lighting the match. The flame caught quick. The straw hissed, blackened, and burst into flame. We backed away fast, watching the fire climb the Scarecrow's body, the burlap curling and peeling like skin. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then something screamed from inside it. Not a man, not an animal, something old, something wrong. The scream was static and wind and rage all at once. It echoed across the field like a signal too loud for this world. And the fire went out, just like that. No smoke, no embers. Just silence. The Scarecrow stood untouched, still watching, and now it was smiling. We didn't speak on the walk back to the house. What was there to say? Fire didn't work. Rope didn't work. Time was running out, and the thing in the field had learned our names. Inside, Dad locked the doors again, like it would matter. He nailed boards over the windows while I pulled the old dresser in front of the back door. The house felt smaller than ever. Walls closer. Air thinner. Every clock ticked out of sync, like time itself didn't want to be here anymore. That night was different. There were no footsteps, no knocking, just the unbearable silence of something waiting. At 3 a.m. sharp, every light in the house shut off. No flicker, no hum, just black. Then came the static, not from the radio, not from the TV, but from the walls. It buzzed through the wood, the floors, the air itself, not loud, but everywhere. A low hiss that seemed to come from inside the wiring, inside the beams, inside us. I tried to call out to Dad, but my voice came out warped, like I was underwater. I stumbled toward the living room in the dark, hands outstretched, and froze. The front door was open. The boards had been ripped off and laid neatly on the floor like they'd been unscrewed, one by one. And standing in the doorway was me, or something wearing me. It had my face, my clothes, my nervous shuffle, but the eyes, they weren't mine. They were black, glassy, button-like. Its mouth hung open, stretched too wide, like it hadn't figured out how lips were supposed to move yet. It tilted its head. Then, in my own voice, it said, "You're in my house." I didn't move. I couldn't. Behind it, in the yard, I saw the Scarecrow again, arms still out, crossbar splitting the moonlight. But now there were more. 2, 3, 6, all facing the house, all waiting. The thing with my face took a step forward, and the floor groaned beneath its bare feet. Behind me, I heard Dad chamber a shell in the shotgun. But when I turned to look, he was gone. "Dad?" I whispered, voice shaking, eyes darting toward the dark hallway behind me. Nothing. No footsteps. No reply. Just the faint buzz of static bleeding through the floorboards. When I turned back toward the door, I was gone. The thing wearing my face had vanished, like it had never been there. The front door was wide open, and cold night air poured into the house. The field outside looked the same but wrong, like it had grown deeper, like the stalks stretched taller, bending in unnatural shapes. I gripped the bat in my hand tighter and crept through the kitchen, whispering Dad's name again. The house didn't answer, only the creaks of the boards and the occasional crackle from the walls. But as I reached the stairs, I stopped cold. There were pictures on the wall that hadn't been there before. Family photos, except the faces were blurred, except mine. My face was sharp, too sharp, and in every photo, I was alone. No Dad, no Mom, just me and the Scarecrow, standing beside me, sometimes behind me, always facing the camera. I stumbled back and one of the picture frames fell. The glass cracked. From behind it, tucked in the frame, was a slip of paper, old, yellowed, in handwriting that wasn't mine. "If it replaces you, no one will know." I ran. Up the stairs, through every room, flinging open doors. Nothing, no sign of Dad. His clothes were still there, his boots by the bed. But the bed was made, neatly, like no one had slept in it in days. The house was folding in on itself. I could feel it. Time was warping. My reflection in the hallway mirror blinked before I did. I spoke out loud and my voice echoed twice, once in my tone, and once in something deeper, slower, hungrier. Then I heard the front door slam shut. Footsteps again. Coming up the stairs, but they didn't sound like boots. They sounded like mine. I turned toward the hallway, heart in my throat, and saw me again. Walking slowly, calmly, smiling now. Mouth stitched again, not with thread, but with corn silk, tight and golden. Behind him, one by one, more figures stepped into the hallway. More versions of me, all wearing different expressions. One crying, one laughing, one frozen in terror. A line of Mez walking down a hallway that now seemed endless. I backed into my room and slammed the door. But there was no lock. And I didn't remember this room ever having a mirror before. But there it was. And in the reflection, I wasn't in it. The mirror didn't lie. It couldn't. I waved my hand, shouted, even slapped myself to make sure I was awake. But nothing moved in the glass. The bed was there, the lamp. The cracked doorway behind me, but not me. No reflection. No presence. Like I wasn't supposed to be here. My skin crawled with cold realization. Something had gone wrong. Not tonight, earlier, days ago. Maybe the moment I first noticed the Scarecrow move. Maybe the first time I heard the static. Maybe when I looked into the mirror that did show me. And the timing was just slightly off. I opened the door, slowly, gripping the baseball bat, expecting to see that long hallway of Mez again. But the hallway was empty, too empty. The house was silent now, still, as if everything had been reset, erased. The only sound was the ticking of a clock, one I didn't remember owning, echoing from downstairs. I descended the steps and followed the sound into the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 3:33 a.m., even though it was still pitch dark. The same time every night, the Scarecrow's time. And then, the kitchen light flickered on. Dad was sitting at the table, calm, silent, drinking black coffee like nothing had happened. "Dad?" I whispered, stepping forward. "Where did you go?" He didn't answer right away. Just took a slow sip, then looked up at me with tired eyes. His face was pale, older somehow, but his voice was steady. "You shouldn't be here," I blinked. "What?" "I live here." He shook his head. "You did. But that was before the field marked you. Before it sent something back in your place." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped. Because in the reflection of the window behind him, I saw both of us. And I was smiling, but I wasn't smiling. The reflection of me was grinning wide, with black, empty eyes and a long corn silk thread dangling from the corners of its mouth. I backed away, breath catching in my throat. Dad stood slowly, tears in his eyes. "You've been gone since the second night," he whispered. "You just don't know it yet." I stumbled back, knocking over the kitchen chair behind me. My mind screamed that it couldn't be true, that I was me, that I remembered everything. The mornings in the field, the coffee on the porch, Dad yelling at the old radio when it fuzzed out again. But the reflection ... it wasn't lying. It stood there, smiling, even though I was frozen with panic. It cocked its head slowly, mockingly, and I realized it wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was leading. Dad didn't move. He just stared at me with glassy, hollowed eyes, the kind you see in someone who's already buried someone twice. "You're not you," he said, voice empty. "You're what the field sent back. It grows replacements. Things that wear our skin, and we keep them, because we don't know the difference." "No," I whispered, even though I didn't believe it anymore. "I'm real." But the words felt stale in my mouth, like lines rehearsed from a part I was never meant to play. Then the window shattered behind me, not from outside, from inside the glass. And for a brief, flickering moment, I saw it. Not the Scarecrow on the post, not the one in the hallway, but the real one. Buried beneath the corn, roots for fingers. A rib cage made of twisted branches. A mouth that opened in 4 directions, stretching across its chest. Thousands of black button eyes embedded in its skin like seeds. Watching, always watching. And in its chest, strung up and twitching, was me, the real me. Mouth sewn, skin pale, eyes screaming behind stitched lids. My hands tried to reach out, but they didn't move. The thing in the corn had fed on me, planted me like a seed. And what came back was standing in my kitchen, wearing me, breathing for me, living for me. And I understood then what Dad had meant. It doesn't want to kill you. It wants to replace you. I ran. Through the hallway, past the broken window, out into the night. The cornfield loomed ahead, a black ocean of whispering stalks. Each step felt wrong, like the ground didn't want to hold me anymore. The earth recognized me, but not as one of its own. Not as something alive. I was just a walking harvest. The moon burned overhead, full and white like an unblinking eye. The field rustled, not from wind, but from movement, things inside. Watching, waiting, I stumbled through the rows, the corn brushing against my skin like fingers, cold and searching. The static returned, louder than ever, bleeding into my skull. It wasn't just a sound, it was speech. Something deeper than language, something that crawled behind thought. And then I saw it, the post, the original one. And strung up on it was me, my real body, my real face. Skin pale, lips sewn shut with golden thread. The head lolled weakly, like it could feel me nearby. Eyes fluttering behind lids that should never open again. I dropped to my knees. My mind shattered in slow cracks as memories flooded back, memories that didn't belong to this body. The birthday with the broken kite. The burn on my wrist from Dad's old stove. The time I fell asleep in the field and woke up under the stars, swearing I saw the corn breathe. The version of me standing here wasn't real, but I remembered it all. And that meant something far worse. I wasn't the original, but I wasn't just a copy either. I was part of it now, grown, shaped, molded to walk among the living. A whisper drifted from the corn, low and thick like roots tearing through flesh. Only one can return. Behind. And me, the Scarecrow, stood at the edges of the field. Dozens of them, some with my face, some with my father's, some with faces I had never seen before, stitched and broken, blinking slowly with button eyes, all of them. Waiting, I looked at. My real self one last time, still twitching, still struggling, still alive. And I knew what I had to do, because if I didn't, it would choose for me. The Scarecrows closed in as I stood between the post and the corn. My breath fogged in the air, but I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel anything. Not hunger, not pain, just a growing silence inside me, like something was winding down. The thing on the post, the real me, lifted its head weakly. Our eyes met. Not a reflection, not a copy. Just a boy, broken and stitched, still holding on. I saw terror in him, but also understanding. He knew what was coming. I stepped closer. The Scarecrows didn't move, not to stop me, not to help. They just watched, heads tilting in rhythm, like they were waiting for the ritual to finish, like they'd seen it too many times already. I reached out, hands trembling, and touched the golden thread sealing my real mouth shut. It was warm, alive somehow. It pulsed beneath my fingers like a heartbeat. Slowly, gently, I began to unravel it, one loop at a time. The mouth opened, and the scream that came out wasn't human. It wasn't mine either. It was the field's. A raw, ripping howl that poured from my body's throat, echoing across the corn like a storm. The sky above rippled. The moon flickered, and every Scarecrow turned not toward me, but toward the post. Then they moved, dozens of them, all marching past me in perfect silence. They swarmed the post, arms outstretched, hands made of straw and bone and root. They reached up not to pull him down, but to lift him, carry him like a sacrifice, like a king. And as they took him away into the corn, the last thing I saw was his face, blank and glassy, eyes wide in shock. I had made the choice. I had stayed, and the field had accepted it. When I turned back toward the house, everything was as it had been. The sky was calm. The static was gone. The front door stood open like it had been waiting for me all along. Inside, Dad sat at the kitchen table again. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "You made it." I nodded. We didn't talk about it after that. Life returned to normal. But sometimes late at night, when the wind shifts just right, I hear something in the field behind the house. A whisper, a scream, a memory that doesn't belong to me anymore. And when I look in the mirror now, it always smiles first.